Are British veterans being thrown under the bus by Keir Starmer's vow to axe Tory laws that gave soldiers who served in Northern Ireland immunity from prosecution? This is World at War. I'm The Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and joining me today is former Armed Forces Minister James Heappey, former minister and indeed a veteran yourself. Sir Kier Starmer saying he would roll back this landmark legislation that effectively sought to end the witch hunt claims against British veterans for alleged crimes that happened decades ago. What would it mean for people like you, and what is your opinion of what we've heard from Sir Kier?
Look, let's be clear, that would be an outrageous betrayal of veterans. The laws that have been passed over the last 5 years, and it should be said, brilliantly championed by the Sun newspaper here in the UK, set out to right this incredible wrong where allegations were being dug up from the distant past and soldiers in advanced years, some of them 70, 80 years old, were being dragged over to court and being challenged to remember the exact detail of something that happened a lifetime ago. I had a constituent in Somerset who had been visited by people from the historical investigations team, and they started to interview him based on contemporary notes that were taken at the time from interviews and from notebooks. But he was allowed none of that to remind him of what had happened. And inevitably, there were inconsistencies between the contemporary account and the thing that he remembered 40 years later. It's one of the successes of the last 5 years that we've managed to legislate to protect people from that sort of investigation. And the idea that an incoming Labour government would repeal those laws and re-expose a generation of British soldiers anew to those vexatious allegations is just an absolute disgrace and undermines, frankly, so much of the good stuff that Labour are saying about defence.
But James, the argument that Sir Kier is making is that this legislation, controversial at the time, but welcomed clearly by veterans, has not been welcomed by any party in Northern Ireland. And I think the criticism, those who criticise it would say that it inhibits the possibility for truth and reconciliation, ultimately for fundamental healing of those decades of troubles in Northern Ireland.
So I understand the argument, and I think as an incoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, if that's what he aspires to be, he's got to make a choice. There is a constituency of people that spans the sectarian divide in Northern Ireland who have a desire to see a sort of truth and reconciliation process. But I think it's worth noting that those truth and reconciliation processes are different in the eyes of both communities, and caught in the crossfire of that process will be British soldiers. Now, the current government has chosen to say, look, understand the ambition for a truth and reconciliation process, but the reality is that the impact on the moral component of fighting power, the trust that troops have that when they go overseas and they follow legitimate orders and they take instinctive actions, lethal actions, that the system will then protect them thereafter. The British government has said that is being eroded and we need to stand up against it, and therefore we're going to provide these protections. I would argue firmly that they should remain. If Keir Starmer sees it differently, so be it, but he needs to make that case to the veterans community, and I think he shouldn't be surprised about the reaction that he gets.
Are you concerned that soldiers' lives might be put at risk because of these legal claims? Not so much in Northern Ireland, but the culture of prosecuting soldiers. We've heard from veterans.
I always have been.
Okay.
I mean, I've given speeches in Parliament, I've said that on the media. Look, these are 18-year-old young men who, they know their rules of engagement, they know that they can apply lethal force if their life or the life of others is at risk. And they know that that's a judgment. And I know from my own time in military service, troops under my command have wrongly applied lethal force. But their judgment at the time was that their life or the lives of others was at threat, and so they took that action, and it was entirely legitimate. Now, I hate the idea that when they are old men, somebody might find the family of those people in Kabul that some of the troops in my command fired on, and all of a sudden there's a criminal investigation that requires them to remember by the second what they saw, how they felt, what they did, to explain their instincts as an 18-year-old when they're 78. That just feels completely wrong to me. So, and what's more, beyond that kind of moral thing about those who have served, those who serve now, when they're stood there and they have that split-second decision to make, to get their rifle up into the aim and pull the trigger quicker than the person that they're looking at, they've got to know that they can trust their instincts, trust their training, believe they know the rules of engagement. And it is the key to the rules of engagement is if it's a genuinely held belief that their life or the life of another is in danger, they can apply lethal force. To scrutinise that with a bunch of lawyers back here in London 40 years later who have really got an ulterior political motive, but the people who pay the price is the veterans community, is utterly ridiculous. I thought this was done and dusted. That's the thing that's so frustrating about this conversation, Jerome. I thought this was dealt with. I thought this country had made a decision not to sort of let its armed forces have a free pass to behave wherever they wish. We hold them to a higher standard, and so we should, because their licence to operate comes from that higher standard. But I thought that your paper, this government, had successfully done something that would protect our armed forces. And I am really worried by what I've heard that says that actually in the next Parliament that might all be up for debate again.
But James, it's also your government, and indeed it was while you were in office in the Ministry of Defence, serving alongside then Secretary of State Ben Wallace, that you launched an inquiry, a judge-led inquiry into the behaviour of the SAS in Afghanistan. How is that any different?
Well, because I think that there are... the difference is that there's an allegation of something that is clearly criminal. The allegation is of extrajudicial killings, murder. What a lot of these Northern Ireland investigations are about is about a sort of nuance of an application of rules of engagement, invariably. So it's really important that people don't think this is anybody making an argument for the British Armed Forces be given a free pass. They're clearly not. It's right that they're held to a higher standard. And when the allegations of criminal wrongdoing are so egregious and so obvious that they need to be investigated, so they must be. But what we're saying is there should be a statute of limitation, effectively, that there should be a period of time beyond which that's kind of, it's impossible to properly investigate that. And also that, there's a judgment to be made about what is in the public interest. And if these are serial, vexatious allegations that are part of a wider political competition, then clearly the government has a responsibility to protect that veterans community. If these are very specific allegations about very serious claims of illegality, so they must be investigated. I see the two as very different.
James, thank you very much for joining me on World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and if you're watching this on YouTube and you have any questions, please ask them in the comments below, and we'll do our best to answer some of them next time.